Greta v. Bollinger was overturned by the United States Supreme Court, meaning affirmative action is no more and has been struck down. Let's get into it. Hey guys, my name is Brittany Janae. I'm an attorney, and as of today, universities are no longer required to consider race and diversity in their admission process. Now, the initial purpose of affirmative action was to remedy societal discrimination. This is not the first time affirmative action has been challenged, but this is the first time it has been struck down. Now let's go back to the very beginning of when affirmative action was first challenged in California versus Bakke of 1978. So Alan Bakke, a 35-year-old white man, had twice applied for admission to the University of California Medical School at Davis. He was rejected both times, although the Constitution does not prohibit the law school's narrowly tailored use of race in admission decisions to further a compelling interest in obtaining the educational benefits that flow from a diverse student body. The court held that a student admission process that favors underrepresented minority groups did not violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, so long as it took into account other factors evaluated on an individual's basis for every applicant. The decision largely upheld that court's decisions in Regents of the University of California versus Bakke of 1978, which allowed race to be a consideration in admission policy, but held racial quotas to be unconstitutional. Now, let's get into the most current cases in the law. Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus Residents and Fellows of Harvard College, and Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus University of North Carolina. Petitioners Student for Fair Admission, or SFFA, is a nonprofit organization whose stated purpose is to defend human and civil rights secured by law, including the right of individuals to equal protection under the law. SFFA filed separate lawsuits against Harvard and UNC, arguing that their race-based admission programs violate, respectively, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court held Harvard's and UNC's admission programs violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The school reserves 16 places in each entering class of 100 for qualified minorities as part of the university's affirmative action program in an effort to redress long-standing unfair minority exclusions from the medical profession. Bakke's qualifications were college GPA and test scores exceeded those of any of the minority students admitted in the 2 years. Bakke's applications were rejected. Bakke argued first in the California courts, then in the Supreme Court, that he was excluded from the admission solely on the basis of race. Now, there were two arguments made. The first argument is whether or not Bakke's individual right under the 14th Amendment and the use of racial quota violated his individual's rights. The second question is whether Title VI under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was violated because any institution collecting federal funds cannot discriminate based on race. The decision was 8-1. There was no single majority opinion. 4 of the justices argued that any racial quota system supported by the government violated Civil Rights Acts of 1964. Justice Lewis F. Powell Jr. agreed, casting the deciding vote ordering the medical school to admit Bakke. However, in his opinion, Powell argued that the rigid use of racial quotas as employed at the school violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The remaining 4 justices held that the use of race as a criterion in admissions decisions in higher education was constitutionally permissible. Powell joined that opinion as well, contending that the use of race was permissible as one of several admission criteria. So the court managed to minimize white opposition to the goal of equality by finding for Bakke while extending gains for racial minorities through affirmative action. Now, let's fast forward to about 20-some years later to Grutter v. Bollinger of 2003. So several decades later, another case popped up challenging affirmative action, Grutter v. Bollinger. The case arose after prospective student to the University of Michigan Law School alleged that she had been denied admission because the school gave certain minority groups a significantly greater chance of admission. The school admitted that its admission process favored certain minority groups, but argued that there was a compelling state interest to ensure a critical mass of students from minority groups. In a majority opinion joined by 4 other justices, Justice Sandra Day, O'Connor, the 14th Amendment equal protection proposed by Congress and ratified by the states in the wake of the Civil War, the 14th Amendment provides that no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. Proponents of the Equal Protection Clause describe its foundational principle as not permitting any distinctions of law based on race or color. Any law which operates upon one man, they maintain, should operate equally upon all. Accordingly, as this court's early decision interpreting the Equal Protection Clause explained that the 14th Amendment guaranteed that the law in the states shall be the same for the black as for the white, that all persons, whether colored or white, shall stand equal before the laws of the state. In order for there to be a general exception, strict scrutiny must be met. All of my common law students remember applying this to our bar exam or our law school exam when it comes to strict scrutiny, the 2-step exam. So let me explain. So strict scrutiny is a 2-step exam, and it asks first whether the racial classification is used to further a compelling government interest. Second, whether the government's use of race is narrowly tailored. For example, is it necessary to achieve that the interest, which is the standard that was applied in this case? The court states first, the interest that respondents view as compelling cannot be subjected to meaningful judicial review. Those interests including training future leaders, acquiring new knowledge based on diverse outlooks, promoting a robust marketplace of ideas, and preparing engaged and productive citizens. The goals are commendable, but they are not sufficiently coherent for purposes of strict scrutiny, according to the opinion of the Supreme Court Justice. They further go on to say it is unclear how courts are supposed to measure any of these goals, or if they could, to know when they have been reached so that racial preferences can end. But the court has permitted race-based college admissions only within the confines of narrow restrictions. Such admission programs must comply with strict scrutiny, may never use race as a stereotype or negative, and must at some point end. Respondents' admission systems fail each of these criteria and must therefore be invalidated under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Second, the court goes on to say that the respondents' admission program failed to articulate a meaningful connection between the means they employ and the goals they pursue. To achieve the educational benefits of diversity, respondents measure the racial composition of their classes using racial categories that are plainly overbroad, and they provide examples. So there was no concerns as to whether South Asian or East Asian students are adequately represented as Asians. Further, it's arbitrary or undefined, meaning that the use of the category Hispanic, or under inclusiveness, meaning there was no category at all for Middle Eastern students. The unclear connection between the goals that respondents seek and the means they employ preclude courts from meaningfully scrutinizing respondents' admissions programs. Respondents have failed to present an exceedingly persuasive justification for separating students on the basis of race that is measurable and concrete enough to permit judicial review, as the Equal Protection Clause requires. Respondents' race-based admission system also fails to comply with the Equal Protection Clause twin commands that race may never be used as a negative and that may not operate as a stereotype. The First Circuit found that Harvard's consideration of race has resulted in fewer admissions of Asian American students. Respondents' assertions that race is never a negative factor in their admissions program cannot withstand scrutiny. So, Harvard and UNC admission programs are infirm for the second reason as well. They require stereotyping, the very thing Grutter foresaw. When a university admits students on the basis of race, it engages in the offensive and demeaning assumption that students of a particular race, because of their race, think alike. In the case of Miller v. Johnson, it was quoted that such stereotyping is contrary to the core purpose of the Equal Protection Clause. Respondents' admission programs also lack a logical endpoint, as Grutter required. Respondents suggest that the end of race-based admission programs will occur once meaningful representation and diversity are achieved on college campuses. Comparing the racial breakdown of the incoming class and comparing it to some other metric, such as racial makeup of the previous incoming class or the population in general, to see whether some proportional goal has been reached, is outright racial balancing and is patently unconstitutional, according to a case called Fisher, as quoted by the United States Supreme Court in their opinion. Respondents suggest that the 25-year expectation in Grutter means that race-based preferences must be allowed to continue until at least 2028. The court's statement in Grutter, however, reflected only that court's expectation that race-based preferences would, by 2028, be unnecessary in the context of racial diversity on college campuses. Finally, respondents argue that the frequent reviews of the conduct to determine whether racial preferences are still necessary obviates the need for an endpoint. But Grutter never suggested that the periodic review can make unconstitutional conduct constitutional, because Harvard's and UNC admission programs lack sufficiently focused and measurable objectives warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner involving racial stereotyping, and lack meaningful endpoints. Those admission programs cannot be reconciled with the guarantees of the Equal Protection Clause. So I read the court's opinion so you guys wouldn't have to. And Justice Roberts stated in his dissent that at the same time, nothing prohibits universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected the applicant's life, so long as that discussion is concretely tied to a quality of character and unique ability that the particular applicant can contribute to the university. Many universities have for too long wrongly concluded that touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges vested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. So, race cannot be used exclusively, but the question becomes, can a neutralized racial mechanism be used in the application to sort of achieve the same goal? I think based on what was stated in the justice's opinion about race being discussed in the applicant's application, makes a good argument that it can still be used in a more neutralized manner, but race alone is not enough. Basically, Roberts left open the possibility that universities can seek to achieve a diverse class, whereas universities might include racial diversity as long as race is not exclusively used to achieve that diversity. So that's a little bit of a loophole that students can use. Next, Justice Sotomayor states in her dissent, to be clear, in today's decision leaves intact holistic college admissions and recruitment efforts that seek to enroll diverse classes without using racial classifications. This is a key sentence because schools can seek to achieve racially diverse classes as long as it is not the only diverse reason or race used exclusively. She further goes on to state that universities should continue to use those tools as best they can to recruit and admit students from different backgrounds based on all of the other factors the court's opinions does not and cannot touch. Colleges and universities can continue to consider socioeconomic diversity and to recruit and enroll students who are first generation college applicants, or who speak multiple languages. For example, those factors are not interchangeable with race. Black people make up about 12% of this country, and we only make up about 5.7% of doctors in America, and black lawyers are about 5% in the profession. Granted, HBCUs help with contributing to the most doctors and lawyers. Affirmative action is still needed to help some Black and Hispanic students get into more of those selective Ivy League schools. Now, about 20 years ago, California did away with taking race as a consideration for diversity in public universities, and studies showed that Black and Hispanic students' enrollment at schools such as Berkeley declined, and less selective schools admission rose. Overall, Black and Hispanic students earned less in their career in California after Proposition 209. I personally think as a result of the course holding, there will be less Black students enrolled in more selective schools, but I do believe that we are smart enough to be accepted on a merit-based system. But since schools no longer have to consider race as a diversity, Black students will less likely be in those spaces. And so we have gone over the history of affirmative action, discussing all of the previous case laws from 1978 to 2003. We talked about Proposition 209 and the studies that was done in California when it came to Black students in 1998 up until currently, as far as like their success levels in Ivy League schools and in the workforce. And so I guess you can say now, you guys, that we are officially legally pretty. And I would love to know you guys' comments and opinions below as it pertains to affirmative action, the merit-based system, Proposition 209 in California. The person behind all of this, who I did not mention, Edward Bloom, who has made it his mission to do away with any seemingly race-based situations in America. And so just let me know what you guys' thoughts and comments are below, and thank you for watching. Bye.